Mother Angelica and, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, many, many others, John Paul the
Mhm.
second, spoke of this, and you mentioned earlier this false compassion. It's really about the approach that that John Paul, in speaking about euthanasia, for example, and physician-assisted suicide in his landmark encyclical Evangelium Vitae, talks about that my responsibility toward my brother or sister.
Mhm.
And what we often say is that we don't want our brother or sister to be burdened with this great difficulty. In reality, it's me, it's myself. I don't want
Mhm.
to be burdened with the care of this individual. So it's a misplaced compassion. Instead of turning toward the other, it turns toward self. And that's really where a good percentage of our world is today, Colleen. It's self-absorbed and not other-absorbed. And again, whether we be Christian, whether we are not, the same issue is there, is how do we approach these moral dilemmas? How do we approach these difficult human situations of life?
Mhm.
And for us, Christ, you know, brings light to these moments. He sheds the greatest light upon them, and he exposes the value of the human person. Remember, go back to what I began with, to be redeemed. Christ redeems us. So he recognizes, as God has shown to us, this great value of the human person. And so this value that God is willing to give of himself to protect, to defend, and to save, and to free us from our captor. And the captor here is death,
Mhm.
in the evil one. So that's the approach that we as Christians walk into these moments. And so, as Paul, and all we have to do is spend time with St. Paul, read all of his letters, especially the letter to the Colossians, his letter to Timothy, the Corinthians. We hear St. Paul talk about, I freely accept the sufferings
Mhm.
for your good and well being. Well, from the very early church, we see the mindset of how this is to be approached.
Mhm.
And that Paul, if I may put Paul, that Paul so loved the world, that Paul so loved his neighbor, that Paul so loved those that he was with every day, that he was willing to endure chains and being scourged and being nearly drowning and being humiliated and being mocked, all because of love. And so it is with a couple, and I think that's in a way what's so important as we have this conversation, is a couple who finds themselves not planning to be pregnant,
Mhm.
but now are welcoming a child. And the initial thought, especially to someone that is not prepared and maybe has a very worldly mindset of, that this is going to cause many difficulties, the initial approach of the world is, well, quote unquote, terminate the pregnancy,
Mhm.
abortion, kill the child. But that is not the response. The response there would be, again, no greater love, that that I will take on this responsibility, I will take on this duty, I will be willing to die to myself because of the value of this little life, this innocent, vulnerable life. And I'm going to do all that I can to assure that this life has life,
Mhm.
and that maybe at the end we give our child up for adoption because we want what's best for our child. Maybe we decide we're going to keep this child, and I will not go to school, to finish
Mhm.
my college. I'll go to work for a while, go back to school. In other words, we all make these decisions daily.
Mhm.
And I think that's the challenge for us, Colleen, as we enter into talking about redemptive suffering, that
Mhm.
we could make that conversation very, very common. And I don't mean that in a bad way, common, but that it relates to everyone,
Mhm.
because everyone does it every day. A mom gets up every morning to care for her children.
Mhm.
You know, how many grandparents today are spending more time with their grandchildren to help their children who are working so hard to provide for their families? They're sacrificing their time for
Mhm.
their own family. How many people we saw during the issues of COVID, that were willing to do heroic things to care for other people, putting
Mhm.
themselves in great harm. Think of the soldier that goes out to battle every day and he makes the supreme sacrifice. Well, most of us will not make the supreme sacrifice.
Mhm.
We will not be, our life may not be asked of us,
Mhm.
all right? But we do make sacrifices daily.